Hi guys, Ross here, welcome back to another video. So in today's video we're going to be talking about how you can UV unwrap a bottle in Cinema 4D. So I did a time-lapse video the other day on a bottle render that I made, and people were kind of picking up on the little details along the base of the bottle, kind of where you have those bumps and where it says like 750 milliliters. And UV unwrapping is the process I go through in order to achieve those details. So that's what today's video is going to be running through. Before I get into the video, as always, if you want to see more content like this, hit that subscribe button down below. At the moment, 93% of you watching my content are not subscribed, and that pains me to my core to have to say that. So hopefully we can decrease those numbers and get more of you engaged in the channel, which would be awesome. If you enjoy the content, hit the like button, and yeah, I think that's pretty much everything. So we're just going to run straight into the video, and yeah, let's do this. I have here just a really basic bottle that I modeled the other day. I used it in the few recent posts that I posted on YouTube and on Instagram. They were the bottle time lapses. If you haven't checked them out, I'd really appreciate that. And basically what I've done is just taken that same bottle, and we've got a fairly simple setup here. We have the walls here, which is just the glass for the bottle. We've got the lid, which I modelled and then did some sculpting to. And then we have the liquid. So the main thing that we want to do here, and actually the only thing we're going to do, is actually just UV the glass for this, because we're not going to do anything special with the lid, and the actual liquid itself doesn't really have a texture. So the only thing we're going to be texturing is the glass, and that in this case is the walls. So we're just going to hide the liquid and hide the lid. And what I'll typically do is create a duplicate of this wall and just put that in a group and then hide the group, so I've got a backup. Because what I'm going to do here is actually make this object editable. So I'm going to press C, and what that's done is combine the object with the subdivision surface it was underneath. If I show you the original one, let's hide that, you can see that the mesh here is nowhere near as detailed as the one we've just made, and that's because the new one has been combined with that subdivision surface. So now we have a much cleaner mesh, which is going to make it easier for our UVs as well. So we're going to get a cleaner UV mesh as well, which would be nice for when we're texturing. So that's usually the first step. I just will create a backup version, make it editable, and now we've got a cleaner mesh to work with. So we're going to change the layout, and we're going to go up to Body Paint UV Edit. You can see that we now have this new window, and everything's kind of moved around a little bit. And this window on the right hand side is going to be where we can start to create our UVs. So at the moment we've got this whole mess of an image here, and that's because it's already given us some UVs. We actually don't want those, so I'm going to delete that tag, and now those UVs have disappeared. So what we're going to do is come up to the top here, and we're going to go through the paint setup wizard. So we're going to click that and deselect all, go into our bottle, and we just want to select the glass wall here. So I'm going to tick that one, and that basically means it's just going to create UVs for that selected object. So we're going to hit next, and we're going to leave these at default. I've never really tinkered with these, so I'm not sure quite what the different settings do, but I've never needed to change them, so I'm just going to leave those at the default for now. Hit next again, and the only thing I change here is I just increase this maximum size here, which is going to adjust the size of the texture when we take it into Photoshop. So I'll usually do 4000 or 5000 so that I've got a 4K/5K texture to work with. This just makes sure that if you're trying to do like a detailed up close shot, that the texture is going to be high enough res for you to get a really nice shot out of that image, out of that texture. So I'm going to set that to 4000 and hit finish. It's going to generate the UVs, and voila, we now have these UVs on the right hand side. Now this is a pretty good start. This could obviously depend on how you have modeled your bottle, so I may do a separate video on how I set up my bottles to ensure that you kind of get this starting point. So yeah, we've got our UVs, and let's start having a look at these. So if I come up here and select the UV polygons, it's now going to select all our UVs. It's going to select all the polygons, and what we can actually do now is start to go through and click some of these, and you can see how that corresponds with our model on the left hand side. So let's just have a look at this. We're facing the bottle front on, I believe, but I will set up a camera just in case. Because I want to know where the front of the bottle is so I can make sure that I align all my UVs up correctly, because chances are I'm only probably going to see the front of this bottle. Okay, cool. So I'm just going to put a protection tag on this camera so it won't move around. And let's zoom back in on this. So we can select both within the UV panel and within our viewport here. And you can see if we just select the front of the bottle here, the UVs are kind of transferring over between all these different parts. And obviously that's not correct. So if I just selected this little portion here, maybe that bit there, you can see how it should be going from this part of the UVs to this part. And then as it goes further around, it should be going to this one. But it's actually jumping and missing this middle bit. And that's because the UVs have been built in the wrong order. So what we need to do now is actually rearrange these different sections so that they're in the right order. So what we're going to do is grab our rectangle selection and start to select the different sections. So let's figure this out. So this object here should be next to this one. And where's that coming from? So that's the back of the bottle. And this is the left hand side. So let's have a look. Okay, so this window here needs to be on the left of this one. So I'm going to grab that and move it over to the left. So we can move it outside of this canvas. And then let's have a look. Cool, so you see how those now are going in the right order. Obviously they're separated and we'll need to attach them, but we'll get up to that point. And then as we go over, that is in the wrong order as well. So we're going to grab the rectangle selection again, grab this, press E for the move tool, and just move that over to the right hand side. And then let's move both of these across. Again, pressing E to get our move tool. And now if we select our UVs, that's all in the right order. So from left to right, we've got our UVs in the right order as well. So now we can see that this part is the front of our bottle and that's in the right bit. Then as we move to the left, we go to the left of the UVs. As we go to the right, we go to the right of the UVs. So let me come out of my camera as well. As we go around the back, it then moves on to these UVs here. And these ones over here are actually the inside of the bottle. So if I turn our object to X-ray, you can see how that's selected the inside. I'm not going to tinker too much with those because realistically, most of the time you're only going to be doing stuff to the outside of the bottle, like adding embossing to it, for example. Sometimes bottles do have details on the inside, but for the most part, it's just the outside of the bottle you need to worry about. So we've now got our UVs in the right order. So from left to right, it's all working how we want it to. But you can see we've got this gap in between them, and we can't see the problem at the moment with that. But if I was to create a new layer and start to brush on this, so if I come up to my polygon tool here, it's going to bring me this brush tool. And if I start painting on this, so I put this little X here and I deselect that, and I'm actually just going to come out the camera so we can see this a bit better and deselect my object. You can see how we're getting this little kind of split down here, this kind of glitch in the texture, and that's because there's a gap in between the UVs. So these UVs need to be stitched together, otherwise you've got this empty space here where your texture isn't going to show. You can see here how it kind of disappears and it's cut off at the edge, and that's because only that little bit there is actually on some UVs. The rest of it is kind of just floating in space. So when that comes to creating quite a detailed texture, you're going to get these problems. So we need to fix that by stitching the UVs together. So I'm just going to delete this layer there. We don't need that. And let's look at how we can do that. So the best way I know how to do this, and I am by no means an expert at UVing, but the way I would do it is I would grab that pane there, for example, that bit of that part of the UVs. And I'm actually going to click on this button here, undock it, and that way I can scale this up and get a bit more space and zoom in a bit more. So let's have a look here. So we're going to zoom in, move over, and what I want to do here is just get them as lined up as I can manually just by moving them around. So I'm going to move that over and just make sure they're lined up at the bottom here. So that looks good to me. Zoom in a bit more. And you can see obviously towards the bottom, the bottle is actually curving out, and that's because the bottom of the bottle is curved. If I just move this out of the way, you can see how the bottom of the bottle is actually curving. So yeah, we get those curved UVs, but we want to find the bit where it goes straight, and that looks around about here, and just get them as close as we can. So I'm going to zoom in a bit further. Whoa, not that much. So I probably want these ones here to be touching. So probably like that, that looks good. And if we come up and we change from the polygon selection to the points, and we can just select these quickly, and you can see that they're just slightly missing, and that's fine, that's close enough. But what we're going to want to do now is actually basically select the points that we want to stitch together. So these ones down here are okay, we can leave those being curved, that's not too much of a problem. But where it probably gets to this point here, where they should probably be touching, we're going to want to stitch those together. So if I have both of those points selected, so I'm just going to click and drag using my rectangle selection. Again, I'm in the UV points mode, and we're just going to come up and press this button up here called UV Terrace. Now what that basically does is it meets both of the points in the middle, and you can now see that's turned that into one point. So now both of these different kind of UV sections that we had are now joined by that one dot there. So we basically just want to do that with the rest of the points going upwards. So I'm going to click and drag and select those points, hold shift, click and drag, and that's going to allow us to select more points. Shift, click and drag. And obviously we could zoom out and do more at once, but I just want to see where they start to split apart. Shift, click and drag, and now you can see they're starting to move outwards as the bottle curves. We could probably go to about this point here, because we don't want to start connecting these all the way up here because it's going to distort the mesh too much. But yeah, we can probably connect those. So we've got a load of points selected. We're just going to hit UV Terrace. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so we can see how this works a bit better. So we're going to come up, hit UV Terrace, and now that has stitched them together. So now we've combined two different kind of UV sections into one UV. So now I'm just going to, let's see, I'm going to close that and just reload the UV edit. Let's move that over. And if I come back up to my polygon, create a new layer and start to brush this. Let's go up to our object. You can see now we don't have that issue where it was splitting the texture before. I'm just going to increase the preview size. So if I double click on my material, go to editor and preview size, I can make this like a 4K, and now you can see that better. So you can see now we're not getting those problems where it was starting to split. You can see we're getting it a tiny bit there, and that's probably because I've drawn on a part where it's starting to split apart. So let's have a look. Yeah, so you could stitch those parts together. This obviously all depends on your model. If you know there's not going to be labels towards those edges, then it's fine. Because if I come into my camera, basically anything that's going to be within this kind of section here, or basically anything that doesn't overlap, is going to be fine. There's not going to be any errors. It's only going to be on parts where the UVs are starting to split apart like this. And if that's the case, then you would just have to stitch these together. But by doing it this way, you're kind of covering most parts. And it's a good starting point, especially for if you're just trying to do little details at the bottom here, where you kind of have those bumps and like 750 milliliter, for example. Cool, so we're starting to get somewhere with this UV, and now it's just a case of doing the same with these other two sections. Okay, cool. UV terrace. And now we have those stitched together. So we've got a lovely UVs for the outside of our bottle. Like I said, I'm not really going to touch on the inside. That's not as important probably, but you could figure out how to do that. Down in the bottom here, this is probably going to be the bottom of our bottle. So let me just come out of that. Okay, so that's probably the inside, that one. What about this one? Okay, cool. So that is the base of our bottle. So that's where I would put those kind of lugs, as they're called. But this texture is pretty much ready for Photoshop now. So we're going to go layer. Hold on. Let's make sure we're in the right mode. Cool, so you want to make sure you've got your object selected. I think you can be in either one of these. Yeah, so you can be in UV points UV polygons or UV points. We're going to go to layer, create UV mesh. And now we've got this white layer on top of our UVs. And basically this is going to be like our guide in Photoshop for when we're laying on our graphics on top. So we've got that, and now it's just a case of file, save texture as Photoshop, hit OK, and I'll just save this to the desktop. And let's call this, what should we call this? Just wine text. Hit save, and let's open that up in Photoshop. So that's going to load, and now we can see the reason why we made that UV mesh layer, because when we turn it off it's just grey. When we turn it on we have got our UVs. So I'm going to go into this other document, which is what I used when I built the previous wine bottle renders, which again you can watch the time lapses for on my YouTube. And this is basically what I set up to create the embossings on the bottle. So let me just run through this quickly. So we've got our UV mesh here. I'm actually going to duplicate these over into our new mesh just to make sure it's all good in the hood. Okay, cool. So what I would usually do first is create a new layer and make that into a black background, and then probably reduce the UV mesh so I can actually see my graphics a bit better. So what I've done here is basically set up a white and black graphics, and this is because we're going to use these to emboss these details onto the bottle. So at the bottom we have those bumps, which are going to give us those lovely bumps you get on the bottom of bottles. We then have the 750 milliliters and the dots, which you get at the base of bottles, and then we have the actual graphics. So you can see that these dots, numbers, and the kind of bump details on the base of the bottle here are slightly blurred. And that's because when you emboss these in Cinema 4D, they need to be blurred just a little bit to smooth out those embossings. If they weren't blurred, they would literally just extrude out without any kind of bevel on the edge. And that's going to give you some kind of horrible reflections and refractions in the glass. So I've just blurred these slightly. And the way I would go about doing this is create your circles first. So I'll just do an example. So I've got my circle. I'll make that white, and I would then turn it into a smart object, and that basically means that when I apply a blur to it, so blur, Gaussian blur, and yeah, that looks fine to me. Because it's a smart object, we're then able to actually go back in and adjust this to whatever we want. So I could turn that to like 1, 2, 10, and we've got that option of being able to adjust the blur without destroying that layer, so we're working non-destructively. So I could actually turn off that blur, and I've then got the original circle back. So I usually convert everything to a smart object before applying any blur to it. So basically the reason why I've used a white and black color scheme here is because when it comes to bumps and displacements, black basically means that it's going to be unaffected by the bump, whereas white means it will be fully affected. So if we had a displacement, for example, of 1 centimeters, anything that's white will be displaced by 1 centimeter. Anything black will be unaffected. So that's why I design everything in white and black. Obviously, if you're actually designing a label with all the colors, you would want a colored version and then a black and white version for any embossings and alpha masks, for example. So we've got the basic setup here. I'm going to delete that background layer. I don't need that. And when we save this, we go back into Cinema. We can go into our material. So I'm going to come out of the body paint layout, go back to standard, And if we go to our material and then reload, do you really want to revert to the save version? Yes, we do. And you can see that's now updated, and we have those details on our bottle, and they're perfectly mapped out because we've UV'd it really nicely. Now we are for some reason missing the details on the bottom. Do you know why it's not? Because we put it on the wrong one. Okay, cool. So I remember when we were selecting it in Cinema, we said the right hand side one was actually the bottom of the bottle, the left hand side one was the inside. So we just want to make sure that we've got that correct. Let's just scale that up so it's right at the edge. That is good, and let's resave it. And the beautiful thing is that once we save it, we can then go into Cinema, press reload image, and there we go, beautiful. So that's how we expected it to look. Cool, so what we can do now is actually look at embossing these. So what we're going to do is actually copy the shader from our color and put it into the bump and hit paste. And that's actually going to add some bump to our bottle. And we actually don't want the UV mesh layer, which is fine. We haven't actually got that, but for some reason it is embossing it. Let's have a look. Let's find out why it's doing that. So both of those. I'm actually going to delete the UV mesh from the Photoshop layer. We don't need that. Or I'll hide it. That might work better. Okay, so I usually work in Corona, so I'm just going to go to Corona Convert Scene. Hit OK. And I'm going to have to do the same thing and turn the preview quality back up. So turn that to 4K. Okay, sweet. So I'm just going to do a really quick render just so you guys can kind of see how the bump works on this. So I'm actually going to set that to a clear, kind of like a greyish colour. Set up a light really quick. Let's turn that off for the bottle on that. So Corona interactive rendering. And now you can see we have got those lovely details on the bottle, and it's actually probably a bit too much. So let's turn that down to maybe like 40% on the bump. Maybe even more. Let's turn it down to like 10. Cool, and now we're getting those really nice details on the bottle. I'm going to go inside my camera like that. Let's turn down the exposure on this a little bit. And you can start to see we're getting those lovely details along the bottom of the bottle. And that's what's really going to help to add to your realism of your renders, is these little details. So hopefully you guys found this video helpful. I know I covered quite a few topics in this video, but hopefully it all made sense. If something didn't, let me know in the comment section down below, and I can try and get back to you on that one. And as always, if you found the video useful and you want to see more content like this, hit that subscribe button, smash that thumbs up button, and hit that notification bell so you know when I upload. I think that's pretty much everything, so hopefully you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.